Hello.
Hello.
So I'll just start with some intros. Dr. Amala Elsan El-Hajouj, founding executive director of Pledge, which stands for Promoting Leadership for Empowerment, Development, and Justice. That's a long name. Amal, you're also professor at McGill for social work. You have over 30 years of experience working at the intersection of community organization, peace building in the Middle East and in Canada. Thank you for joining us, Amal. Brian Brofman, you're the president and the co-founder of the Peace Network for Social Harmony, and for over 15 years, Brian has leveraged the power of collaboration to unite stakeholders in the field, helping them achieve more together than they would individually. Welcome, Brian. So you have been friends for over 20 years, which is not in your 20s, as I supposed, because I'm younger. Amal, you were born in occupied Palestine. Brian, you were born in Montreal. You've been to Israel 5 times, 2 of which were with Amal. One of you has an Israeli passport. Who is it? So some of you might say your relationship is, kumbaya, excuse the term, but I know you insist on having difficult conversation. How did your friendships change over the past year?
Over the past year specifically, I think the past year, it's been obviously an awful year on so many levels. I don't even need to get into it. And it affected Amal very personally in ways that she may describe. But I guess the impact of the past year is that this friendship, which evolved over 20 years, and especially over the past 10 years, we met 20 years ago. And here was this person from a religion I didn't really know, background, like Islam, a background, a Bedouin person I didn't know. For me, it was something very new. And I thought it was fascinating, and just from our very first conversations, it was like, oh my goodness, we share the same values, we share the same objectives. We were working for peace and for social harmony and for understanding between people, these elements that I'm sure we're going to be talking about today. And that gradually at first emerged into a connection that turned into a friendship as we started to invite each other to family events. We taught together at McGill in 2016. We're teaching there now, actually, and we'll explain that to you as well. But I'd say I'm mentioning all of that because we became friends just naturally, just because we had this connection. She's just such a wonderfully dynamic and loving person, and I learned so much from her, and I've had so much fun and fulfillment and growth thanks to this friendship. But in the past year, that's actually become almost a strategic tool, because unfortunately it's so rare. It's so rare from what we've seen. And again, this is why it's not why we became friends, but suddenly we see ourselves in this world where a Jewish man and a Palestinian woman, it's unusual to have that kind of level of trust. It's unusual to be able to talk about everything and anything. And so given that, and given that close relationship, and given how Amal and I talked post-October 7th about how there were impacts in our communities that were utterly unacceptable. What's happening in the Middle East, of course, is like beyond unacceptable, but we're not really intending to talk about that in too much detail. What we're talking about is the impact in Montreal. And those impacts within our own communities, we thought were something that we could directly work on together. Given our relationship, given our positionings, given that she has Pledge, I have the Peace Network, and so yeah.
We share an office.
Absolutely, we share an office. We keep getting closer and closer on all these levels. And so yeah, that close relationship, that friendship, and that work as colleagues, which also has existed, as I mentioned, for like 8 or 10 years at least, became something that we could work with in order to actually make a difference on the ground. I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But that's where the past year has really taken all of that and supercharged it so that we can do our best to make a difference here at home.
Yeah, I would say that the fact that we became very close friends are because of the reason Brian was open to be challenged as a privileged white man. And when you get to that level of allowing yourself to be challenged is where you build trust and build that ground that absolutely is a ground that you can, from their departure with different ideas and perspectives. And as someone who grew up always in the discomfort zone, I have never lived in a comfort zone in my life. I just feel reaching out to someone who's different, someone who's, in my case, belongs to a group of people that confiscated my land. It's really challenging. At the same time, it's really courage, because you wanna talk, you wanna explain, you wanna expand your horizon. And it's only because of the reason that I was willing to throw myself in that discomfort zone that I was able to expand my horizon, open my heart, especially during very difficult times. And this is because we both were willing to be challenged and also challenge ourselves, and to understand that there are issues that we disagree, but not only to say, okay, we agree on 30%, we disagree. We also discuss what is it that we don't agree on and why it is that we don't agree on. So we continue the conversation. It's not just saying
daily. We're
daily, 5 o'clock in the morning. So the dialogue between us is absolutely 24/7. And I am not easy on Brian. I send him the horrible scenes that no one can even imagine in the middle of the night, and he would answer me saying, okay, what is it now? Tell me what's going on. I will tell him, how do you feel about this? So it's really this kind of relationship that we created based on the fact that we are there to challenge ourselves and to step out of our comfort zone. Because if we're not stepping out there, nothing will be changed. And that's what I really encourage everybody. Step out of your comfort zone. The fear is only jailing you.
And I think that stepping out of the comfort zone for me comes, as you said, sort of from a different place. You came out of the comfort zone towards a Jewish male despite the pain and the experiences that you lived when you were in Israel. For me, there's no specific pain. There are stereotypes, I guess, which I was not willing to buy. And there was an interest in expanding my horizons, but there always is. I mean, I gotta say, through my work with the Peace Network and other things I do, I've met incredible people like Kevin Deere has become a friend and someone I've also learned tremendous things from. So for me, I appreciate difference. I'm not scared. I'm not rejecting it. I don't look at people as the other. I actually, if someone has a different culture, a different religion, a different way of being, could be a sexuality, it doesn't matter. I actually find that fascinating, and for me to learn about that and to incorporate that into my life is something enriching and fulfilling, and just it's like just adding more and more and more to my own existence as a person.
And so what's really making it work from you apart from stepping out of your comfort zone? Like, what's your recipe for talking about this without a filter when it comes to dialogue on issues of anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia?
I don't think there is filters. If you have trust, the only thing you want to make sure that you share deeply the values of humanity. And if we agree on that ground, then any conversation ought to take a place without fear, without censorship, because this is how we create a new knowledge. This is how we create new perspectives. And if it's respectful, and if it's really trying to understand and bring into that space the safety. And when we talk about safe spaces, and I hear this every time, people like, we need safe space. Absolutely, we need safe space. But that safe space for me is a space where we really connect our struggles. When we see that anti-Palestinian racism, when we see Islamophobia, when we see anti-Semitism, when we see anti-black racism, when we see anti-indigenous racism, when we connect all these struggles together, this is when we create that shared spaces, how to discuss these issues. We can't live in silos. We can't allow for ourselves to say, I am Palestinian and that's it. I am Palestinian and I am part of that collective struggle. I am Palestinian and I am part of these conversations, this comfort zone that creates more dialogue and more growth. So this is how I see the safe zone, and this is how really I would really encourage all of us to see it as a place that really provide us with the new perspectives.
Yeah, I think the friendship, as we described it, is sort of a microcosm for what you can do in a larger context, which is what we do with the Solidarity Dialogues. The idea is to recognize and talk about those common values, common objectives, common experiences, those basic interests that we hold as human beings. And through conversations, and before you get to that, I mean, you're not going to jump into the hard conversations just like that if you expect it to be productive. You're risking things just sort of blowing up if you just jump into things. But if you lay that groundwork, and it can take years, or in the case of the Solidarity Dialogues, for example, the workshops that we're teaching at McGill right now, we spend a full class laying the groundwork before we get into the next class, which is actually dialoguing. So you create that sort of trust by looking at those commonalities, and you, it takes work to get there. But again, the way that we connected can be the way that other people connect. They just have to be open. They have to be open. They have to be listening.
So in a sense, you're trying to recreate your friendship across diverse communities through the Solidarity Dialogues by really trying to build a foundation for these conversations that are not always happening. What do you do when people don't want to have that dialogue?
Yeah, well, it's when the idea started 8 months ago, more than that, it was that moment when I felt I am sinking into pain. It was that moment when I wasn't able to really think clearly, and I felt my heart start shrinking, and and harden. I didn't want to be in that place. As a social worker, as someone who's teaching social work, and as an indigenous Bedouin, this is not the way I grew up. And always my grandmother said, stand up. Pain is gonna pull you down, but hope will pull you up. And that's my name in Arabic, Amal, hope. And that was the moment when I contacted Brian, and we said that the true leaders are for these moments. If leaders are not stepping out from their comfort zone, if leaders are not showing us the way, then we don't need leaders. We need leaders in these tough, trying times. Leaders who have courage, leaders who are brave, leaders who have empathy and committed to justice and committed to humanity. That's what we need. And that was the idea when we trained first cohort as leaders from Montreal, from academia, civil society, and faith institutions, and experts in dialogue. And we brought them together, and we were really surprised by the idea of having them coming for 4 full days in the summer. Everyone said to us, no one will come, it's summer, forget about, but we get the first line leaders coming joining. That tells you a lot about the need for leaders to lead and really create that space for our communities, because they are waiting for the leaders. If the leaders are not stepping, what is it for the communities? So that was the idea. And now we have 8 initiatives are taking place in different communities in Solidarity Dialogues, and part of them are going to be really put in academic courses in Concordia and McGill. And from our 8 sessions that we already had with our student at the School of Social Work at McGill, like, students are brave. We project the fear on them. Students are very respectful when they have the safe space. They respect, they talk, they step out of their comfort zone, and we should respect them and trust them that they can lead and they can do it. And that's part of what I feel sometimes like, oh, we can't give the space to the young generation. It's their space. We need to be there to guide them. It's their future. If they don't have a say, then who has the say on that future? So it's really very important, the work we do with the students, and it shows that they are capable of engaging in difficult conversations in a respectful way and in a huge empathy towards each other. And they share their pain, and that's what really encourages both of us to continue these solidarity dialogues with our students in different campuses.
And they also have a natural propensity, as probably everybody does, but certainly these students, they're amazing, to know what it takes to create the sort of open, honest, at least it can be discomfort, but at least comfortable enough that they can share the sort of dialogue, the sort of conversations that will allow really deep exchange, as we talk about it, difficult conversations on divisive issues. So I wrote down sort of, as part of the initiative within the Solidarity Dialogues with the students, we ask them to come up with a list of what it takes to create sort of open and honest dialogue. And I think their keys are amazing. They came up with things like curiosity. Yeah, we have to be curious, and that's what made me so interested in learning from Amal and learning from Kevin and learning from so many amazing people. Listening is huge. Listening to understand also. Not to think about, okay, what am I going to reply to them, but like really deep listening and understanding. Giving space to people. Having courage, empathy, curiosity again. Challenging ideas and not the person. So, okay, let's not stereotype. Let's not just assume that this person is one way or another, but let's actually listen. And if there's an idea that we don't like, we're going to challenge the idea. We're not going to challenge them personally. Asking questions, looking for honesty, respect, of course, critical thinking, compassionate curiosity. I like that one. Aiming for collaboration, not consensus. We don't agree on everything, and there shouldn't be an expectation that you're going to agree on everything, but at least look at how to collaborate. Look at those common values, those common interests, those common objectives, and work from that.
And I want to bring you back to, you're talking about creating dialogue between communities that may not come from the same background. What about intra-community? What about when it's in your own community, when people don't have the same experience and understanding of events, of, things that happen? I know I come from Serbia, specifically, as a Roma woman, and I know within the Serbian community, the discourses we're having on post-genocide are quite difficult to have as conversations. So I'm asking you, Brian, how do you have this conversation within your own Jewish community between Zionists and non-Zionists? Is it possible right now?
Oh, that's a hard one. Yeah, and my perspective is not necessarily a typical perspective. There are many within the Jewish community who see, if we're talking Israel, Palestine, in a particular way. And I think that there's certainly credibility to that narrative, and I think it needs to be respected and heard. But I think that there's another narrative that also needs to be respected and heard that comes from people who maybe think about or are more sympathetic towards Palestine. And I personally, I think I hold both perspectives. And for me, I think that a strong Israel means a strong Palestine. A strong Palestine means a strong Israel. Israel will not reach its full potential until it has a Palestine living alongside it, where people feel like they lead lives of dignity and fulfillment as well. So I don't know if that's typical of everybody within my community.
Right.
And I'm not, to be honest, I'm not having loads of those conversations, but I'm aiming to have more, and I would actually like to generate more of those conversations. That would be within sort of my list of objectives. Amal and I actually just kind of talked a little bit about that this morning, that getting the religious communities that maybe don't see and don't live and don't work in these gray areas where where we work all the time, getting some movement there would be hugely beneficial.
And building on that, you know, there's a quote that's widely circulating right now from James Baldwin. I'm sure you've all seen it, when he says, when we disagree, and we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression. It's widely circulating. When it comes exactly to the context of addressing conversations, particularly around Israel-Palestine, and your work together, how do you talk about your experiences of oppression, and how can we navigate them to approach fostering and understanding?
Yeah, I think we mentioned that it's really your ability and to be ready to step into that discomfort zone. It's really where you talk about your oppression in a way that the oppressed and the oppressors are both victims. And the minute you understand that, you open that space to really create this, commitment towards justice, because the oppressor is absolutely a victim of violence, a victim of his own or her own actions, and I think it's very important that we bring this as a way to look at oppressions and system of oppression. And I think also that many times it's really people avoid, because they think that dialogue is a process that takes from them. And when you are engaged in dialogue, you give up on your identity, but that's not the case. Dialogue is a space where you strengthen your identity. Dialogue is a space where you become more aware of your own perspectives. And some of the students would say, for example, when we said, like, you create the keys that you want to use to guard the process and the safe space for your dialogue. And one of the students said, well, I want my beliefs to be respected, and that was a moment where we said, okay, so, like, yeah, everyone has a belief, but that dialogue space is where you kind of check your own beliefs and go visit them and revisit your own perspectives. If you come in wanted people to respect your beliefs and ideas and way of thinking and opinion, you will leave that space with the same thing. So when you go to that dialogue space, you are ready to make sure that your beliefs and your perspectives and your ideas and bringing up all these things are there to be discussed with in respectful way. But if you are going there just, I want to say what I think and go, that's not dialogue.
What about when in situations when the oppressor doesn't see themselves as an oppressor? So you'll see the situation, for example, in Quebec, like when the French-Canadian community doesn't necessarily see themselves as an oppressor. And, I'm sure many Indigenous people could speak to that. And yet, they see themselves as oppressed. I've seen this in journalism classes where my prof would say, les Québécois sont colonisés. I'm sure you'll see the same thing, right? So how do you have a conversation when the oppressor doesn't see themselves, sees themselves as an oppressed minority?
Well, one thing I believe is that you won't get there by yelling at each other. You can maybe assert certain rights, but you're not going to change, I believe you're not going to change people's hearts and their beliefs through power or through rights. It's a matter of getting down to interests. It's a matter of having those venues, those opportunities to exchange, to understand, to listen to each other, and to see those, well, at times those commonalities or even those differences, but to be respectful and to be open, and to recognize that there can be multiple perspectives and multiple narratives that have credibility. So the people in power positions, they have a legitimate voice in their own way, but that voice needs to be one that sort of gets tempered, or that is open. How do you change their perspective? I mean, Yeah, it's by appealing to their hearts, appealing to something within them around that shared humanity. Maybe you have some ideas of how to get to there.
Well, I think, Leila, this is a big question.
I know.
This is not an easy question because most of the oppressors are oppressed in one period of history. And always, as someone who is teaching the liberating approach in social work, we talk about these things. How
You teach anti-oppression.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
right?
you go for it.
Yeah. So how do you liberate yourself in a way that when you have the power, you are not oppressing the others? So it's all about the liberation process that you go through it as an oppressed. So when you gaining power, you are not using that power over people, that using that power with people to empower other people, other oppressed people. But the problem is, if you look at the history, most of the oppressed are the oppressors, people who were oppressed. And this is when I look at the Jewish history and I ask the big question. People who went through the Holocaust, the horrible event in history, and the world was silent. The world was watching what's happening. And that's what we are seeing today. That's exactly what we are seeing today. So the big question is, how do we create a situation in 20 years from now, inshallah, when the Palestinian people are free, that they are not going to oppress others? And that's what I pray for, that we are liberating ourselves in a way that we are not oppressing the others. When I fight for my rights, it doesn't mean that I exclude others from their rights. It's not on the expense. Rights are shared by everyone. All people share the same rights. There is rights for everyone. The planet is a place that we all can share. But these greedy leaders, this is the world that we are living, the capitalism, all these systems that we are all playing the game within these systems are the system that we ought also to change and say, we don't want to play the game. We want to change the game. And this takes time. And I have faith in the young generation.
And just to add to that, and I've heard you say this, I thought it was interesting that within that system, it favors debate, and it doesn't favor dialogue. It favors people clashing, looking out for number one, of course, being me. Well, I think that we, at least in Canada in general, look more towards community, towards family, towards sort of the greater needs of society. And it's that sort of openness that the way that, yeah, everybody has rights. Rights are something that are shared. And there's enough room for empathy for everybody, too, and for other narratives, and for that kind of openness that lead to society that experiences solidarity. There's a reason why we use the word solidarity for our project. We could have said the unity dialogues, because we sort of bring people together, and unity is wonderful. But solidarity implies a responsibility for each other. It means that we're going to stand together, we're going to work for each other's well-being, we are unified and beyond. And so that's what we need in Canada, and that's what we're working towards. We are working towards this greater solidarity.
When we talked earlier, we talked about oppression, and Brian, you mentioned one thing which I thought was really interesting. You said that in order to have dialogue, you need to recognize your privilege. Can you expand on that?
Well, I mean, I'm not exactly sure why I've always been open to that recognition. I mean, for me, being in a privileged position, it never made sense to me that having more money or whatever would add to my well-being. It was never an objective. I mean, I'm super fortunate, but yeah, if you ask me what I wanted to do when I was younger, I mean, I was in school for a long time. I did law school. I did a master's in environment. Finally, I did the mediation training. I did a year in mediation. But I always knew that what I wanted to do was to contribute to society, to do something to help our communities. And so something within me, maybe it's because I had a model. My father was very much that way. He was a people person in that sort of old manner where before people had TV and YouTube and TikTok and whatever, there really was just conversation. I joke with my daughter sometimes saying, when I was a kid, I had my own form of internet. We called it conversation. Well, people in those days really did talk and they did connect. And I think that maybe some of that brushed off on me, that I'd like to connect with people. And that includes recognizing that, yeah, I am in this privileged position, and most of the people who I meet are not in that same position. And yeah, so I have more money or whatever, but they have life experiences, they have culture, they have other things that have tremendous value. And the world, life is not just about your bank account. It's not just about money and the things you have. It's just so much more. And the things that provide real fulfillment and a real sense of purpose are those things. And so I cherish those things in my life far more than anything else.
And I'll end on this on my side. Maybe we'll take one question from the public. When is dialogue not an option?
When people are not in agreement on the very basic thing, which is our humanity. When someone who's seeing a child slaughtered and still want to think about it, that's when I say, and it's really difficult when people lose their humanity and not able to communicate. But for me, that's when I'm not saying I won't take responsibility. I will try to bring these people because that's who I am. I'm not someone who would say I'm not talking with people. I will try to bring. But if someone is not seeing a child killed as something inhumane and a starved family and people who are slaughtered, these are difficult places to be and try to bring people in dialogue. But there is something that I really also want to mention, Leila, which is the media, the dual power of media. And I, as a Palestinian, I would watch the news, especially in Canada and in America, and I would see how the media is dehumanize people and humanize other people. When they, just for example, we're talking about the massacre on Nusayrat camp. Killed, Jewish are killed, Palestinians are dead. And that by itself can create tension and mistrust. So I look at the media and I really want them to really understand that reporting in such a way is really creating divisions in our own communities. How do you want the Palestinian to watch the news when we are only numbers and others are killed and we are dead? And this is something I see very often in the media. And that dual power is also when the media decide to take the lead on these things and really do honest reporting and a reporting that provide the full picture of a humanity of all sides. That's when media can really help us as civil society leaders. If we can work for like 20 years from now, day and night, and media is not there to help us shape the narrative of togetherness, anti-racism, and the media continue to really have like this headlines that fuel the tension, then our work is not going to be enough. Our work is going to be always, there is something that's threatened by the media. So I want to make this clear to ask the media people, please reflect. Please read your report twice before you go on air. Please check with yourself if you are representing people equally. Please, if you have your humanity when you talk as a way to think of this community, this neighborhood in Montreal, and they are listening to what you are saying. How would they hear and listen and get what you are saying? That's what I want the media to understand. They have a role, and they have to play it in a way that they help us. And this is one of the things that we for many reasons, I reject to be interviewed by the media because I know by the end of the day, they will cut my interview, they will use whatever they want because they have that point that they want to focus on, which is not fair. And that's usually what media do with marginalized minorities. When they talk about Black Lives Matter, when they talk about indigenous people, mostly the people that we don't have the voice, they create the voice, the narrative that they want to create. So media people, please, this is a great responsibility. Please.
I would, I think Amal's points are really important, but I just feel like it's important that to mention that having, I think I have some degree of pulse on on both sides' feelings towards the media and towards other things. I'm sorry, I have a little something in my throat. Here, I'll take some water. And, no, that's better. And, you know, I hear complaints from, and I hate to even use these terms, but like the pro-Israel and the pro-Palestine sides. And as I said, I think that these things are really interrelated. But for lack of a better term, I hear from both sides that they feel like they're not represented from the media, they're not heard. It's true, they both feel not recognized, not supported by government. Each side has that same strong feeling that they're not being respected, that they're not being heard, that they're not being supported. Now, whether that's fair or not, and Amal makes a strong case for what she said, something's not working. Something's not working to have everybody think that their ideas, their interests, their trauma is not represented. Yeah. There has to be a better way. Yeah. And I think that better way has to involve something around this idea of dialogue, of narratives, of everybody's perspective, getting out there and maybe being jointly heard or presented in a new way, something that's more effective and that actually gets you towards a next step and just doesn't keep you in that same silo that you already started from.
We're going to take some questions from the public, so 3 questions. We don't have lots of time, so short answers, sorry. Okay, is discussion and conversation all that's needed?
No. But these are the foundations for joint action. You can't promote justice and anti-racism in your neighborhood if you don't have the conversation and the understanding. So Solidarity Dialogue's initiative is action-oriented. So yes, that's the first stage of people understanding and talking, but it is absolutely towards an action of people leading community projects together that tailored toward fighting against hate crimes and against racism. So that's the idea, and towards how to create a safe, shared space in Montreal as a city where everyone is invited. And I used to say this as an indigenous Bedouin, where in my tent, no one is left behind or outside of that tent.
Yeah.
And it's also possible, once you've had those dialogues, those conversations, and you feel that connection with someone. So the idea is that with dialogue, you have the sorts of conversations, the sort of communication that you haven't had before, and that leads to something productive, where you start to understand each other, start to hear each other, understand each other, express each other better, express yourselves better. You've got that understanding, which leads to empathy, which leads to connection. Okay, so thanks to dialogue, thanks to these conversations, you have connection. But then the question is, then what? Well, it could be as little as, okay, you tell your friends, your family that, you know, I've learned that these people aren't quite what I thought they were. You start to break down the stereotypes. Or maybe those groups that have been in dialogue together decide to create some sort of continuing committees, could be some sort of, it could be a book club, it could be whatever it is, and it's really up to them. But stage one is to get that conversation going, to break down the silos, break down the stereotypes, and open people up. And then it's really in their power, recognizing that shared humanity and wanting to make a change, to put something in place that goes to that next step.
And you know, you mentioned both that in order to have the dialogue, you need to step out of your comfort zone. How does one step out of their comfort zone when talking about this?
By taking risk, by agreeing that you are not going to feel comfortable, that you will be challenged, that you might hear stuff that you don't want to hear, that you might say something that people don't want to hear and they will not be happy with what you are saying. That's exactly the place. You need courage, you need bravery, and like if I would like ask everyone here, the way we do with the students, share a moment of bravery in your life. And everyone would share, but all of them would share with pride. So being brave is an idea where you get to new spaces and you absolutely grow. So when people talk about bravery, it's not just the risk, it's also the gain from this bravery. So yes, it's not easy, but the gain is huge. As I said, I have never lived in a comfort zone. All my life was in a discomfort zone. And I absolutely value that, and I encourage my kids to step out of their comfort zone every single minute, and to challenge themselves and to challenge their values and perspectives, and that's what we teach our kids. But when we grow up, in some ways, we became more close-minded because it's the job, it's the system, it's this. We need to go back to our childhood when we were ready to jump into these spaces with courage, so we gain new skills. Without jumping into new spaces, you don't gain any new skills and you don't grow.
Brian, you mentioned as well, you know, like how does that work for you? Because, you know, when you come from an oppressed minority, like you said, stepping out of your comfort zone, you're never really in it. But you mentioned your privilege. So how were you able to step out of that comfort zone in conversations with Amal? Well, I'm sure she's challenged you over the past.
We have talked about everything. You named the controversial issue, we've talked about it.
Yeah.
We haven't necessarily agreed on it, but even if we haven't agreed, I think I've broadened my perspective, and I think there's value to that.
So the last one is a question that will make you may step out of your comfort zone. What happens when lobby groups create a loud echo chamber meant to dehumanize Palestinians, and how can Canadians understand the truth of the situation? Just dropping the bomb for the last one.
Look, growing up in a fairly traditional Jewish household, but even with parents who were very open-minded and I mean, I believe they're certainly not racist or discriminatory. They're quite wonderful, and my father particularly, if he met anybody from any different background, he would keep talking and talking and be like, "Dad, we gotta keep going," but he'd want to know about the country they came from. It's like, oh, such interesting people and whatever. So I think that helped me sort of be open. And so for me, but my point is that I didn't really know the other narrative. I mean, there was Yom HaAtzmaut, and there was the Nakba, but I didn't really know the Nakba. And yeah, there was one particular narrative about what happened in 1948, and I guess in the years leading up to it. And I think there are elements of truth, and Israel's an amazing country. I mean, it has accomplished so much, and it is generally democratic, and it's hugely achieving, but it has one big problem, the way that Canada has its history of residential schools and horrendous racism that frankly, I'm ashamed of, and I think all Canadians should be ashamed of, with respect to Indigenous people, well, Israel has this really black mark on it that is massively problematic, and that it took me a long time to learn about. Having learned about it, I mean, I guess I could just reject it as being too threatening. I could embrace it and say that would become my only narrative because I'm just so ashamed and I want to work against it. Or I can be fortunate enough to meet an amazing Palestinian person who I get to talk with, who I get to share ideas with, who I get to learn from, and who I can decide, okay, you know what she said is, I totally buy that, and that's become a shared belief. Or it's something, I don't know if I'm quite there, but I think there's a lot to that. It's important to keep that in mind. Or it's, okay, she doesn't really believe this, we don't agree, but I know that she's heard me, and I hear her, so we can continue forth. Again, we don't necessarily have consensus, but at least we've heard each other, and we can work together.
Amal, the last word is yours. How do we understand the truth in this situation?
Well, there is no single truth. The truth with a capital T is something that people are chasing, but there is nothing like this. My truth is my truth. Brian's truth is his truth. Everyone has his own truth, and our truths are driven by our way of thinking, based on our context, based on our traditions and our histories and our experiences and our traumas and our pain and our victories and our failures. And the question is how you reconcile all these truths together to create that common ground between all these truths, to understand that there is one thing in common between all these truths that they all have to submit to it, which is humanity. A truth that doesn't include humanity is not a truth. And this is what we are also trying to, because people are coming with the truth. That's the truth. And no, there is not a single truth. And we have first to acknowledge and admit that, and then we can really talk about this different truth, and understand that there is something that brings us together, and that this truth that I believe in has that core value that no matter what happened, that core value is there, which is humanity.
Thank you. That will be all the time we have for this conversation, but I know it deserves much more time. So I'd like to invite you all to thank Amal and Brian for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.